right. Hello, everyone. How y'all doing? I was about to say happy Friday because I'm used to doing these on Friday, but it's Tuesday. So happy Tuesday. Before we get into today's live stream, I always like to ask little surprise icebreaker questions. So, Joe, this one's not that much of a surprise. It was on the screen. My question to you is what's like the weirdest, this might be hard to think of though, but what's the weirdest like AI hallucination that you've encountered?
Mm. Um, the one that jumps to mind, I don't know if it's actually considered a hallucination, although it's a bad generation. This was early on with ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT to pretend to be a random human, and it consistently told me that it was like a 20 to 30 something tech worker, either living in New York, Seattle, or San Francisco. And it just like always, it would switch genders sometimes, but it was very
What?
like, clearly I know who's building this. And they have since like patched that, but I thought that was a really interesting insight into the way it was trained, at least initially.
That is really interesting. I will say for me, the one that stands out, and I don't know if this is counting as a hallucination either, but when I used to work at GitHub, I used to do a lot of dev advocacy for GitHub Copilot. And one time I was like demoing, like sending a tweet with Copilot, and it brought up a tweet from Donald Trump, and I was like, oh no, like in front of a bunch of people. I was like, I wasn't trying to do all that. So that was a little awkward. But okay, perfect. I'm curious from the audience as well if you have had any weird AI hallucinations or that you've encountered. And then let me see about a more fun one off the top of my head that has nothing to do with tech. What about a candy that you like but nobody else really likes, or it's like known as one that's like people are like, ew, I don't like that.
I love sweet tarts, and I was like the kid at Halloween that would trade all the chocolate and everything else for all the sour stuff like warheads and sweet tarts. And apparently no one likes them because you can't find the crunchy ones. You can only find the chewy sweet tarts. So I must be like the one person who's really looking for the chalky old sweet tarts you used to get.
I love sweet tarts. I think I'm probably similar to you with candy. Like everybody likes chocolate, but I'm like, I like the sour candy. Okay. All right. So that's enough. And for people that are just tuning in, today we're talking about how we can reduce AI hallucinations and a whole bunch of other stuff that Joe's been really researching on AI, and I'm really curious and excited to learn about. But before we jump into that, I do want to know about your journey into artificial intelligence. Right now, I know that you work as a payroll engineer, so I'm curious, like, what role does AI even play in your day-to-day job?
Yeah, so to start kind of where I got into it, I've been interested in AI since I was an undergrad studying history and philosophy. I took a class on philosophy of mind, and we did like a whole section on um, basically consciousness and if machines could be conscious, and like in the future where machines are starting to pass the Turing test, like how would we know? So from like a philosophical standpoint, I've always been interested in it, but I really didn't get like into like AI, like practically speaking, until I was going back to school for a second bachelor's in computer engineering. And I have ADHD and a math disability, so math and science was never my thing. I avoided it like a plague. In my undergrad, I took one class, math, for all practical purposes. I think I got a C in it. So when I decided to go back to school for engineering, I was like, I know I need to kind of rewire my brain a little bit. And I picked up this book, Mind Performance Hacks. It was like tips and tools for overclocking your brain. And it had a bunch of cool stuff in there, including like how to use programming to like improve your productivity and creativity. And there was a chapter on the idea of an exoself, which was borrowed from a book called Permutation City. And the idea of an exoself was in the future, we would have the ability to like duplicate ourselves in virtual form and have like a perfect virtual assistant that would help you like be the best version of yourself. And that really like spurred my interest in like using AI to like help me learn things like programming and science and engineering, but also like always like this idea of having like a virtual assistant that could help you be like the best version of yourself. So that's been like 10 plus years since I've been in school and looking into that. And it's always been a long interest of mine.
Whoa, that's interesting on the exoself thing. I feel like it's kind of sounds scary but cool at the same time. I relate with you a little bit, like not that I like went on this deep dive with AI, but on the part of like not being really great at like mathematics and ADHD and stuff like that. I'm like I don't even know why I chose to get into software engineering because like am not good at math. But I relate with you on leveraging AI as well to kind of help offset some of the, I guess for me, like maybe like weaknesses and help bring them up as strengths. I'm going to quickly say hi to people in the chat. So hey to Ace. He said, hi, Joe. Hi, Rizal. Tanya was saying ChatGPT argued with me why anchovies on pizza are valid when I was talking about Hawaiian pizza. Uh, Ace said, not sure if this counts as a hallucination or threat, but saw the post recently about the one asked, oh, yeah, I did see Google saying that.
Yep.
And then hey to Andrew and hey to Lima as well. Okay, so let's talk about hallucinations from your research or from what you know, like what causes hallucinations in generative AI tools?
Yeah, I mean, I think you had a question in there too about like how, as a payroll engineer, how does AI like fit in there? And I think it's a good segue into hallucinations, which is like, I think there's a good sense that like AI is can be pretty good at writing code, and I'm a software engineer working on code, and so hallucinations are really like, I think, one of the first things that I noticed when I started using AI to code, even when like GitHub Copilot first came out, generating bad classes and like, imports that didn't really exist. And so like I'm using AI now daily, in my work. And if I was getting hallucinations every single like prompt, I wouldn't be using it and it wouldn't be really useful. And so I think that like LLMs have definitely improved over time. So you just see that less, but they definitely are still there. And the more complex tasks you look for, or you ask it to work on, you're going to get different types of hallucinations. And so, I think one thing when we're thinking about hallucinations, like it's almost a misnomer to think about if you're thinking of an LLM exhibiting like human level intelligence, then it seems like a hallucination. But I think a better way, or at least the way I look at LLMs and the way I work at it, is that it's really like a super fast pattern recognition system. Like if you assume that it's like knowing something or thinking and you're getting weird results, then it feels like, well, why did it do that? But it's just exhibiting the patterns that it's been trained on and the prompts you give it. So like you get better results when you're more specific. And like that's the most basic way to do prompt engineering. There's a lot more of like what causes these, but that's at least for me, that's the best way to think about it when you're talking about the reason why it's hallucinating.
Yes, I love that. I think that's pretty aligned with the way I think too. Because when I hear people talk about AI, they're kind of talking about it as a human, and they're like, "How come it didn't know?" And I'm like, "Because it's just looking at patterns that it's been trained on, and then it just spits out like, oh, this is the best match like that I found." So I like that. Um, Let me see what other things I wanted to uh, ask you about. I think, okay, sometimes developers, especially, right, especially junior developers, they may be taken down a rabbit hole
Mm.
'cause they don't realize that like what AI is generated is a hallucination or is incorrect. Or do you have any like tips for spotting when AI might be hallucinating? It's a hard question, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's actually a really great question because I've done mentoring for a long time with more junior engineers, before ChatGPT and after ChatGPT, and in or LLMs now in general. And I think that it's I look back when I was learning coding, I'm like, oh, I wish I had this. But there is something where it's like, if you're just trying to kind of copy and paste it and you don't have like the debugging skills, like you still get pretty caught. Now, with that said, you could be pretty resourceful because like will take my stack trace or for errors that are coming from my code and add it back to Goose, for example. And Goose is pretty good at telling me like what could be going on. Also, Goose is like a very big different versus just like a Claude or a ChatGPT where you just copy the code without the context. So it's like it's really important to have the context. But if you're a junior engineer and you're learning, I think it's usually better to try to start incrementally. And you're still going to be looking at Stack Overflow. You're still going to be Googling for stuff. And you kind of look at it in parallel, where it's like it can help you speed up things like generating boilerplate, but you still need to understand the fundamentals to be able to actually really debug and get to the next step.
Lots of good points. I had a lot of thoughts, but then they all like every time you said something, but then they like went away from my head. So hopefully they'll come back. Um, okay. Oh, I think it was one of the thoughts was on the context. I really do like when like AI developer tools like Goose tell you like, hey, here's what's going on. Here's why I suggested this. Because then your brain could be like, okay, that makes sense. Or you could be like, that doesn't really make as much sense as I was hoping. Um, and I'm curious if you have any like, I know you said in the earlier that you didn't have any like specific tips maybe, but I'm curious if you have any like specific examples where you've used prompt engineering strategies to like prevent hallucinations. I think you talked about like just making sure you're like really specific so that like like results come out, but yeah.
Yeah. I there's a lot more on the prompt engineering side. It's more so there's less on like if you don't know that the code is wrong, then it's hard to like you kind of need to know a certain level. But when it comes to reducing hallucinations, that's the I think the fun part in the research I've been working on is there's a lot of really great resources out there already on prompt engineering. I think one is called like I think it's promptengineering.ai, or I'm sorry, promptingguide.ai. So anything I say here, definitely check this out because there's more details on that. But the big one that you'll see in the research is called chain of thought. And there's a lot of different strategies around chain of thought. But really, it's about prompting the AI or the LLM to talk through why it made a decision. So the more that you tell it kind of like, please think step by step. And there might be like, there's a kind of a zero shot, like I'm going to give it one prompt and get a chain of thought, or you might have like multiple prompts. And then the strategy that I have seen the most useful, and I think it's also why Goose is powerful and seemingly magical at times, is the combination of both like a chain of thought with tool use. Tool use being like, I'm going to, the tool use kind of focuses the LLM's intelligence down to a single choice point. And so if you have that and you say, I want a tool, that helps you kind of like figure out why it made a choice, because the tool is a signal that it's deciding to do something else. And so when you have multiple tools, you start getting something closer to like a more advanced multi-process step for reasoning. Yeah.
That was insightful. I never thought of any of that stuff before. And I'm actually curious, like, what sparked your interest in even investigating or researching how to reduce AI hallucinations? Were you just like, I'm so pissed off at the hallucinations or what?
Yeah, actually, it was a little bit of that because I was starting to use it more and I was getting kind of like just bad imports and stuff. And I'm like, this is just not working. And I even tried to like teach myself, and I got set up with a retrieval augmented generation RAG tool to be able to like index a whole code base and turn it into a like format that the AI could use. And even when I did that, it would still make up things. So I was like, well, I just trained, or I just like, turned a whole data set into vectors that the AI should be able to understand, and it still would generate stuff. And I'm like, what is going on here? Because even seemingly with the context, it wasn't giving me the answers that I was looking for. And so that was really what kind of sparked it. I think the other piece was that when I studied philosophy as an undergrad, I took a class called Critical Thinking and Symbolic Logic. And that class actually like unlocked me feeling like I could go into math and science. And it was so important in my mind to be like, this is how you can break down a problem and understand whether something is valid or invalid. And I was like, that's what I want from an AI agent, especially an AI agent in the future that I might want to go run to do something autonomously. I want it to be able to ask the question like, nah, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe I should go ask the user that requested this first before I move on. And so that's been really like what I've been interested in, is like, how do you get it to kind of behave and think critically?
Dang, you had some really cool classes in college. College did not have those. Um, and I think this would be a good spot for us to. You mentioned like having different tools and stuff like that, and you've mentioned Goose. This would be a good spot for us to kind of talk about or show off the Google Workspace integration toolkit that you developed. So I'll give you a
Yeah,
second to pull that up, but I think
sure.
it's cool to see how that works. And for folks to while you're doing that, for folks that don't know what Goose is, it's like an on-machine developer agent. Short way of thinking of it is like an AI developer agent, and you can interact with it in your terminal, or you can interact with it in your IDE. And it kind of is, I would describe it as semi-autonomous. All right,
Cool.
let's jump in.
Yeah, thanks for the intro on Goose. So I'm in my terminal here, and I've already installed Goose, so I can just run this command, Goose session start. I've implemented a toolkit, so I can actually show this if I go Goose toolkit list. There's a bunch of toolkits. These are including ones that are from like the Goose plugins repo, separate one. And here's the one that I recently implemented. And so I should be able to start my session because I've added this toolkit already, Goose session start. And I'm going to ask it to please list my events for today. And I've implemented a simple tool. Right now, it just is able to connect to my email account. But for the first time, I need to actually log in. So I'm actually going to switch my account
Yes,
here.
so we don't see that.
Uh,
Or we will.
oh, that's weird. I just was, there we go. Hopefully that will.
Perfect.
There we go. Oh, that's weird. Let me try that one more time. Of course, I did this right before our call, and I had no problem authenticating. But that's
It's the demo gods.
that's the demo for sure. Let's see if we can get it to work. Let's see. I'm going to try it one more time. I had logged in. And then I logged myself out so I could show the full auth flow. But maybe I got into a weird state. Let's see. Okay, there we go.
There it is.
So now I should be able to just use the Google OAuth flow and enable. Now you can see here. So I should be able to go back to the terminal. And there we go. I added 2 events, one including our live stream for today, and another one just for like my meeting later today. So that was like, the tip of the iceberg, because it's, just listing events, but I can also like please list recent emails, for example.
Oh.
And it's just going to give me like a quick summary of my emails. But, for somebody who like really likes using, web-based productivity tools, like maybe they don't really see the value of doing this, but I've always done stuff in the terminal. And so like, I even like do some task management and stuff for the purpose of productivity stuff. So that's the quick demo of the Google Workspace, but like the hope is this is going to unlock being able to, for at least for me, to be able to do like all of my productivity stuff just from the command line.
Yeah.
And like, between like the Jira command line tool and the GitHub command line tool, and like Goose is so powerful at being able to just use tools that like I can basically do all the stuff that I need just from the terminal talking to Goose, which is really exciting.
Yeah. No, I think this is cool, especially like you said, for people that feel really comfortable in the terminal, they want to stay there. I think when we have so many different tools and platforms that it can get distracting. So it's like, oh, maybe I'll just, and maybe that's also a reason I don't check my emails that much. But you're like, okay, let me just see what emails I have, get a quick view of it. I'm already in the terminal. I think that's a cool toolkit that you developed. And I want to make sure, like, audience, if you have any questions, feel free to type in the chat. We have more to show off as well. I think you had another demo. Would you want to show that now? And
Yeah.
I kind of don't, I didn't really, I'll be honest. You described it, it was like something about semi-autonomous, but I didn't know what it was. So
Yeah.
Feel
Yeah.
free to tell me what it is and also show it off.
Yeah. So maybe give some context. So when we talk about like semi-autonomous or autonomous agents, like Goose is somewhat semi-autonomous. Like you can ask Goose to do something, and Goose will figure out like, oh, I need to go look up a file, or create a file. I might need to suggest some code, make file changes. It can run any kind of shell command you can imagine. So it's pretty autonomous. It can figure stuff out. But generally, it will like do stuff for a little while and stop. And you, at least in my experience, I usually am only having Goose like running for like a minute or two before it kind of stops and says, "Hey, like I've made the changes you want." But like, what about something that like actually needs to take longer time? Like, if I give an AI agent a bigger task, like please research AI agents on the internet and like take 30 minutes to like scour the internet and compile your info. Like that's a longer task. It's going to take longer amount of time. It might need multiple tool calls to try different pages and summarize things. And so like that's like a complex process. And while it's happening, it's somewhat of like a black box of like what's happening under the hood and what step in the workflow it is. And so when I first try to implement this, I was using just like a simple background job process. And my hope was that I could, in the flow, which I haven't quite got this plugged into Goose. So the demo I'm going to show is in a separate project, but I actually worked on the Google workspace in this other AI agent, and then I ported it into Goose. So my hope is eventually to port this functionality into Goose. But the idea was that I should be able to ask Goose or my AI agent, whatever you want to call it, a question that requires longer term processing. And I wanted to be able to say like, cool, I got you. I'll go work on that. And like and then be able to continue to have the conversation. And while I'm having the conversation, have the agent multitasking, working on the process in the background, and then be able to say, hey, what are you working on? How far along are you in the process? Can you give me an update? And the long term would be that the agent itself could be like, actually, I'm going to stop and then respond back. And so that's kind of really what I'm looking at. But to solve the black box problem, I was looking for something that would give me something like a reliable like workflow system. And so I've used Temporal, or I've seen it being used for teams and other projects. And so I was like, I think this could actually be a really good tool. And so Temporal is like all about building like durable workflows. And so the demo I'm going to show is an example of talking to an AI agent that will trigger a background process that is actually like working in the background. So we'll see if the live demo works.
Cool. This was a great context for me.
Okay, let's see. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes, I see Discord.
Great. So this bot is actually implemented as a chat bot in Discord. So yep, it looks like it's running. And the bot's name is Beta, and I can use the and let's just see if Beta will respond first. Make sure it's running. Okay, great. So I have a debug message, and right now there's a routing that happens, and it will simply look like if it's something that's a really simple request, like saying hello, it will just respond with like a message. And then anything more complex. So you can see I have some output from a previous one, but let's try another one like at Beta. Maybe I'll try a browser one. So let's see if I can find the URL. Please summarize this page. Cool. So as the workflow is started now, if I come back here, I can see this is the temporal interface, and I can see that there's an execution, and it already completed. It did its thing already. If this was a longer task, though, I would have been able to see at what phase this task is running, as well as if there's subsequent activities that it can perform. So in the world of temporal, you can have a workflow that has multiple activities. So this could be like I gave it a bunch of different URLs, and it goes through, and for each one, it's kind of working through the activity, and the workflow doesn't complete until it finishes. We can see here, this is actually the result. So if it all worked correctly, I should see here in Discord, it read the page, and now it's giving me a little bit of a summary of what was on that page. So very, very simple example, but the idea is that if I ask it to do something else now, like at beta, please look up the current price of Bitcoin, for example, and then I go at beta, hello, while it's doing its thing, let's see if it will beat it to the punch. But you can see I was able to actually send a message while it's still working in the background, looking up the price of Bitcoin. And then there you go. Now it updated it, and it looks like Bitcoin went up today a little bit. So the idea is that this is actually happening like in parallel. I could actually be having a conversation while it's working on something else, and then it pings back in the channel. The next thing I want to do is be able to get it to actually respond into the original thread and be able to have a continued thread with it. But yeah, so very simple example, but the hope is that will unlock like more complex workflows in the future.
That's so cool to see that it can manage multiple, I guess, conversations or tasks at the same time. Because I'm so used to being like, okay, let me wait for it to do its thing before I ask it something else.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, I actually wrote a couple of questions about like the
Mm-hmm.
semi-autonomous nature stuff. I think I see the benefits, but could you explain the benefits of the having Goose or any AI agent working in the background, researching stuff for you, or doing this multitasking while you're doing something else? Because maybe somebody will be like, "That's cool, but why would I want this?"
Yeah. I think it's useful for anything that really requires like a longer form type of thing. This is where the like critical thinking is key, because it's like, well, you're wasting in the case if you're using like Anthropic or OpenAI, you're paying for tokens basically. And if it's just like working in a background process for 30 minutes and it's just spitting out gobbledygook, then it's not really useful. But if you can get an AI agent that's able to think critically and ask questions and be able to, do closer to human level reasoning, then it can be actually a useful thing where I could say, go look up all of the top AI agent repos on GitHub, and go through each code base and like provide me a summary of what it's doing and how, like, what could I learn from these like repos, right? And now it can just go do that and spend the time to figure it out and take a longer process like that. But it only really works once you figure out how to get it to like work, effectively. Otherwise, it's just going to be like spending money for no reason.
Interesting. I thought of it from a time perspective, but I wasn't thinking of it from a tokens or money perspective. That's good. And then let me see what other stuff. I think are there okay. I I have like multiple questions I want to ask. I'm trying to decide. Okay, so what do you think that there's any moments of like if you give it like this like make allow it to do all this background stuff in the background, like how can you balance that with its reliability and security? Because you can just be like, oh yeah, go do your thing. And
Mm-hmm.
I think you kind of were talking about it. You have to make sure it's actually doing something valuable. But like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you make sure that it is? Because you can say you do your thing and then you come back 30 minutes later and it's like deleted every single repo
Mm-hmm.
you ever wanted or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's definitely permissions you need to consider. Also, like, for example, Goose is an on machine, thing. So when you ask it to do something, it just makes the change to the code, right? And so that's really useful when you are already in the code and you're doing Visual Studio. But for things that might take longer term, actually, something I've been working on is to be able to have it recommend like the code changes as a pull request versus making the changes locally. So the thing that we just saw on Discord, it right now it's just running on my local machine, but I also have it where it can deploy separately as a server and work in its own isolation. So that's the other thing, right? Like you can sandbox it, you can deploy it separately. So you can give it more permissions to say, oh, you can only recommend changes to this GitHub repo, or you only can do read-only permissions. So I think that's where you, for more of these complex things, like it probably doesn't make sense always to be living like on your machine. But it benefits from the same things. Like, you could still have like Goose running in a like headless environment, making code changes, and then you want to like push them up to GitHub, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that kind of sounds a little bit like GitHub Action workflow that Mick made, where it's
Mm-hmm.
like you can have Goose, you can tell Goose like, here's the issue, open up a PR for this, and it'll like do it in the background. Um, okay, you actually talked to me a little bit like on Slack about ontologies. I want to dig into that a little bit. For first off, I want to take a step back. For those who are unfamiliar, how will you describe ontologies in like simple terms and why they're useful?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so an ontology, it's used actually in a bunch of different disciplines, including computer science and engineering. But like generally, it's usually a structured set of information. But it's not just like a list of docs. There's a hierarchy to the ontology, and there's like a classification system. So you'll see things like ontologies in things like science or medicine, where you need to have like a strong structured set to describe like every medication, or every species or something will fall into some type of ontology. And where ontologies are useful in AI is it can give an AI kind of a representation of the domain that it's looking to reason about, without necessarily having to go into the details of every single thing. So this actually gets into kind of like, how do you get better results out of something like Goose without having it to read every single file every single time you ask it to make a question? So for example, I might have a hints file for Goose, or a system prompt for Goose, that gives it a tree of just the main folders in the repository, with a description of the purpose of each folder. And so instead of me having to always explicitly say this is where a thing lives, I have a structured set of information about like what means what. And so that makes it easier for it to figure out where something should go. But like this could be taken deeper, where you create an ontology. And actually, one of my first open source contributions was to something called a controlled English store that was developed by IBM. And the idea is that this is like a natural language database that represents information in a human readable and computer readable format. So what that might look like is a toolkit for your AI that's able to like look for something and query something in the ontology. And that's like how you get the exact response in the answer, versus it just being like predicting the next sequence. So like I really see LLMs as almost like, it's like a universal compiler interpreter. Like, the LLM can take any natural language statement and compute it into a programming language, or structured query language, or even like some like representation, like a controlled English language. And this also makes it like easier for us to understand what it's doing when it's looking within the ontology and say, oh, well, the reason I did this because according to the ontology, these two things are related, and that's why I put these two things together. So it helps like reduce the black box and give it like a stronger set of parameters to work with.
Yeah, and reduce hallucinations too. Wow,
Mm-hmm.
this is some big brain energy. Like I'm like, wow, I never considered any of this. And then I think you almost kind of answered both of these last questions I had. Like I was going to ask like how do AI tools today work with navigating and understanding code bases? I don't know if you wanted to expand on that or you feel like you already touched on it.
Well, no, I think it's like, especially for anyone who's like listening, who's like, I want to like try out Goose, for example. I feel like I've had people be like, either like me, or I'm like, this isn't like a game changing technology, or like, oh, I'm not sure how to get the best results. And some of it is like, Goose is really good. It uses ripgrep to go find files, and it's pretty good. You can give it just like the name of a class, not even with the right like capitalization, and it can figure out where it is. But it still has to do work to figure out where the file is, just based on the pattern matching. So like, in lieu of not having like a hint that says these are where things live, like the best results I get are like, if I needed to do something, I tell it exactly the file that I want it to operate. I almost never let it just go figure stuff out unless I'm doing some type of exploratory work. But especially when you're working, I think for someone who's like new, who's just trying to use this tool and they're looking at a blank canvas, using any AI tool is difficult because there's no patterns to follow. But like if I'm working on like my day job work, and I'm like, well, I built this component a couple of weeks ago, and I know I need to build this other component. It's very similar. I'd be like, Goose, go look at this component, and then with these different changes and like apply it the same. And it's great. And it does a very good job of very few hallucinations when I just tell it like, go look at a file and do what I want you to do. But if I just said like, can you just build a whole new feature? And it's like, I don't know. So then it just starts trying to spam looking for where the thing you're looking for. So it's like just simple adjustments like that of always giving it a specific file path. And the other thing is like, you don't just ask it to make the code better. And this is harder for a junior engineer who might not have the vocabulary yet to say, this is the engineering best practice. So this is where it's like, the more you learn, the better you get. So I can say, oh, I want it to apply the dry, don't repeat yourself principle, like remove any duplication, or ensure that all the types are, so once you start building up that vocabulary, then you get better and better results. So it's like a self-reinforcing loop. But it also is like the more code you have that you've written already that is applying the software engineering best practice, then the AI is going to do closer to what you want it to do. So it's kind of like, the cart before the horse. Like the more good code you have, then the better it will write it. When you're starting from a blank slate, try to use a template or some other thing, to apply those best practices. So I definitely benefit from that because I have a lot of stuff that I've already worked on that I can reference.
Yeah, I do think the more knowledge you have, the better it gets. Because I was just been playing around with Goose, like do random stuff. Like I told it to like make a component I have be like glass morphic or use clay morphism, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was a couple years ago, I'd be like, make it more transparent and shiny, and maybe it wouldn't have come out with those exact results. I want to say hi to sorry. I wanna say hi to I can't say your what's it called, your username, but hi IU, I know you in real life. And then also Tanya asks, like, have you ever created a good response checklist where you look for key things to determine whether a response is valid / helpful or not?
Mm. Do you mean like is it a prompt that says you should check for these things, or more so like an evaluation criteria? I guess is like, because like I've when I'm like building some of these prompts where I'm looking to get certain results, I usually will write actually like a written unit test that will have the prompt and like the expected response. So let's see if yeah. Oh, evaluation criteria. Yeah.
Yeah.
So so I do a lot of evaluation stuff to see how that works. And actually something I recently came across, let me see if I can find it. It came out of Noose Research. If you haven't come across it, they have a open source repo. I think I can share it with you here, called Open Reasoning Tasks. And they actually are doing something I was already starting to do, which is like creating essentially tasks that can test this type of like advanced reasoning. So this is really cool because they have a list of like all of the different kind of like logical reasoning types of things that you're looking for and like an example of how it should perform. And so I haven't really sicked any of my like critical thinking agents on this task list, but this is something I'm actively looking at now to be able to benchmark if my agents are performing better than just like the base LLMs that I'm using. And that's really what I'm looking for, is like, can I eke out better reasoning than just using Claude or Grok's OpenAIs or something like that.
Interesting. Okay. I've never heard of that before. And also, I have another question that has nothing to do with any of this. I know you're using Anthropic and Claude. Have you felt like that's given you the best results for your like connecting your LLM to Goose? Or have there been other ones that you preferred for different tasks?
Yeah, I have definitely, since I started using Anthropic's API for my stuff and using the Claude interface, I think it's been the best performance on most of like the writing tasks and coding tasks. It doesn't have nearly as all like the plugins that like OpenAI has. I do think that there are a couple open models that are getting pretty good though, like closer to what like Claude is like. But so far, like, my day-to-day, all my agents right now are using like Anthropic for the most part.
Nice. I was just nosy and wanted to know. I think I've come to the end of like all of the questions I had. I thought it was really insightful. There's some parts that I was like, oh, this is how I think of like AI as well. But then there's some parts I'm like, I never even consider that. So thank you so much. I don't know if you have any last things you were like, I wanted to share this before I left. Let me
Yeah, parting words. I would say if you're interested in like technology, like this is like such an exciting time to go like learn this stuff. And it can be challenging at times. I remember when I first started learning coding, I didn't have an AI agent to help me. And I pretty much almost threw my computer out the window trying to install Ruby for the first time. I knew nothing about the terminal. I was very nervous and like it kind of borked stuff. And you can get yourself into a hairy spot, but like it is now much easier for you to like get help, like what I mean, like teaching myself terminal now compared to like when I was like just like creating flashcards and trying to remember all the bash commands. Like the craziest things is like when I'm using Goose for work and I'm able to achieve a task without really ever touching the text editor. Like I've had several tasks that I've used in my work for payroll where I basically just achieved it via prompting. And I was, asking it questions and talking with it and having it make changes and watching it run tests and do the work and basically just like look at the code and like this looks good, and like I've had several that were almost zero shot and a couple that were just like one or two like quick changes that were like significant, like made an improvement. Like I was able to get to something like that I didn't expect to be able to do, that was like a developer happiness task or help me solve a performance issue. So it's like the more you learn, the better you'll get results from it, and it also is very good for teaching you. Like don't just rely on it, like try to understand. Like there's a great thing. Let me see if I can find it. I think it's 20 rules for formulating knowledge, I think is the effective 20 rules for it. I'll share this one. This one's for your own learning, but actually I found, especially with a math disability and like struggling with math and science, that I found that I have to break things down very granular for me to understand something. And actually the way that I break things down, I find is sometimes useful when I'm trying to ask to elicit it from an LLM to explain what I'm trying to like do that. So this article here helps you figure out ways. And one of the things it says, like, don't memorize until you understand it. And so, like if you're doing something and the AI is able to spit something out and you're like, oh, cool, it works. Like before you move on to the next thing, like then backtrack. You could even ask it, add comments to the code, explain this, go look up an article of why like it does that. That's what's going to reinforce it versus just kind of like copying, pasting and not really knowing what you're doing. So like, challenge yourself to learn it, but like I also hope that people are encouraged to try and tackle this.
I love that. That was really good advice. And Ace said, I guess in response to you, like saying AI agents are definitely changing that. I think that was like how we learn. And he's like, how did we ever use code alone? I agree because like you were saying, when I first learned to code, there was no AI, nothing. And I felt like every time I made a mistake, I would like delete a repo and start over because I didn't know like you can just push your changes and open a pull request. But yeah, and now today, like my little sister doesn't know how to code, but she like used Chat GPT to like help her make a JavaScript game. And I thought that was really cool. So it is changing the game. And I do agree with you. That is valuable to still not just copy and paste, but to go back and be like, why did this work? How is this happening? That way you'd be able to apply it yourself in the future. Um, that's all I have, y'all. Thank you so much to Joe for like spending your hour and like explaining to us your thoughts on hallucinations and ontologies and all of this other stuff. I think it was really insightful. And also thanks to the audience for tuning in, asking good questions, and being engaged as well. And I want to remind you all that Loose Goose November is happening. Tomorrow is the last day. We have seen, which I'm really happy about, some cool contributions. Like some people wrote blog posts on like how to install Goose with Windows, or some people have been creating like their own toolkits, like a file type analyzer and all that. So I'm really excited to see what else you all create. But that's it. Have a great Tuesday. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.